Montana Territory, summer of 1880, for the dry wind carried dust and laughter, and both stung just the same. They were laughing again. Francesca Holloway stood by the hitching post outside the general store, her hands tucked into her apron, jaw tight as she watched the group of women across the street. Younger ranch wives, all of them, clucking like hens outside the millinery shop. She could hear them even over the creak of wagon wheels and the distant hammering from the blacksmith. "Still living alone out there, is she?" one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. 42, and not a soul to warm her bed, but that much she calls a dog. Francesca's gaze didn't shift. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. Her father's passing. The fever that took her mother. The man she once thought might stay gone off to Nebraska, married inside a year. And then years of caring for her younger sister's 2 children after that sister died, birthing the third. The boy and girl had gone and grown, left for the East, left her with their childhood drawings on the wall and silence in the mornings. She lived alone now on the edge of town. Ran her small homestead with steady hands, grew vegetables, sold eggs. She had her books, her routines, her dog. It was enough. Until today. "Ma'am," a voice called out low and steady. She turned. He was dismounting from a chestnut gelding, tall and sun-browned, probably mid-20s. His shirt clung to him where sweat had darkened the cotton, and his hair curled slightly at the ends under his hat. "I think this belongs to you," he said, holding out a woven basket hers. She'd set it on the store counter and forgotten it in her hurry to leave. "Thank you," she said, reaching for it. Her fingers brushed his. He smiled, not mocking, not polite. Warm. Like he saw her. "I'm Callen Easton," he said, tipping his hat. "Just took up work at the Renshaw Ranch. Been in town a week." She nodded, unsure what to say. Most men his age barely looked at her unless she was handing over coins. "I have seen you around," he added, then paused. "You come into town on Fridays for supplies." "You watch people's grocery habits?" she asked, raising a brow. His grin widened. "Only yours." She blinked. He seemed serious, but not heavy. There was a light in his eyes that made her chest feel too tight. "You always this forward with strangers?" she asked, voice steady. "Only when they leave their basket behind," he said. That made her smile, despite herself. He nodded toward the road. "If you're headed back toward Holloway Place, I'd ride alongside you. Get my horse some stretch." She hesitated. "You know my place?" "Everyone in town knows your place," he said. "You grow the best carrots. Big as a baby's arm," someone said. She let out a short laugh. That someone was probably old Mr. Tiller. "He exaggerates everything." Callen mounted again. "Well, Miss Holloway, may I escort you and your basket back home?" Her chest tightened again, in a way that made her feel foolish. But she nodded. "All right." They rode side by side, her on her old mare, him on his younger horse, the sun dipping low enough to throw long shadows across the dusty road. He asked questions, not the usual small talk. He wanted to know what books she liked, what flowers she grew, whether the rumors were true about her apple pie being the best in the county. "They exaggerate that, too," she said. "I doubt it." They reached her fence line before the silence grew long enough to be awkward. He slowed his horse as she stopped at the gate. "Well," she said, "thank you for the company." He looked like he wanted to say more, but just nodded. "You're welcome." She watched him ride off, her heart unsettled. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her like that. 2 days later, he came again, this time with a broken bridle in hand and a sheepish look. "Reckon I could borrow your leather punch?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "Did you break that bridle just to have an excuse to visit?" He held her gaze. "Maybe." She let him in. The visit started after that, always with a reason, until the reasons no longer mattered. He helped her haul hay from the barn to the shed, fix the porch step, ran his fingers down the length of her worn fence and said, "I could mend this for you if you like." And all the while, the town whispered, "Does she think he's serious?" They said. She ought to know better. He could have his pick of girls half her age. But Callen kept coming back. And Francesca kept pretending not to wait for him. One afternoon, she found him in her garden, kneeling in the dirt, coaxing a stubborn tomato plant into standing. He looked up at her and smiled. "You should not be here," she said, her voice quiet. "Why not?" "Because people are cruel. And you are young." "I am 25. She looked away. "I know what I want," he said. She met his eyes, and he stood, slowly, like he did not want to startle her. "I am not afraid of them," he said. "I am not afraid of what they say." "You should be." He took a step closer. "Are you?" She didn't answer. Her heart was too loud. He touched her hand just a graze, and she felt it in every inch of her skin. She stepped back. "I cannot," she said. He nodded and left without another word. That night, she stood at her window and watched the dark settle in. Her hands were clenched at her sides. The next day he did not come, nor the one after. She told herself it was better this way, until the third day, when a knock came at her door. She opened it and found Miriam, the widow from 2 farms over, standing pale and wild-eyed. "It is Callen," she said. "He was thrown from a horse breaking a new colt. He has not woken. They are saying he might not." Francesca did not think. She just ran. When she reached the Renshaw ranch, she shoved past the hands and found him lying in a small back room, his face bloodied, breathing ragged. She sat beside him, took his hand and whispered, "You fool." He did not stir. She stayed through the night. And in the morning, when his eyes finally opened, the first thing he saw was her. She leaned in, tears streaking her cheeks. "You came," he rasped. "I never stopped wanting to," she said. He smiled, weak but real. "Then stay." And she did. The first time Francesca saw Callen walk again, it was dusk and the fields behind her house were gold with barley. He came slow, leaning heavier on the walking stick than she liked, but upright. His left arm was still bound close to his ribs, and his eyes held the shadow of pain, but they were clear. Intent. She was shelling peas on the porch, the old dog curled at her feet. She looked up and didn't speak. He didn't either, not until he reached the steps. "You still mad I fell off that damn horse?" She set the bowl down and stood. "I'm mad you didn't let someone else break it. Would've if I'd known it'd land me in your bed." Her breath caught. He took the last step and stood in front of her, taller even with the limp. His fingers brushed the hem of her apron. "I remember everything you said, when you thought I couldn't hear. I was afraid you'd die," she whispered. "And I was afraid you wouldn't be there if I woke." The air smelled of dry earth and sweet clover. A hawk circled high and silent overhead. "I've been offered a line cabin," he said. "Renshaw wants someone north of the ridge to watch the cattle come fall." She crossed her arms slowly. "That's 3 hours from here." "I know." He let the quiet settle. "I turned it down." She nodded once, not trusting her voice. "Didn't want to be that far from your carrots," he added, and her mouth twitched against her will. She stepped down onto the grass, standing close enough now to see the healing scar along his temple. He watched her, steady. "I never planned for this," she said. "Neither did I. I'm not sure I know how to plan for it now." "We don't have to. You just have to let me stay." She reached up, touched the collar of his shirt where it had frayed slightly at the edge. "There's been letters," she said, "from my niece back east. She's got a family now. Invited me to come live with them." His jaw shifted. "Are you going?" "I thought about it. When you were laid up, I thought I might. And now." She looked up at him, sunlight catching the gray at her temples. "Now I'd rather stay in a place where someone wants to fix my fence." He leaned in then, slow and sure. His forehead rested against hers. "I want to build you a new fence," he whispered. "And a kitchen with a window over the sink. Maybe a porch swing." "That's ambitious for a man who can't lift his left arm." He chuckled low. "I'll heal." They stood like that until the sun slipped behind the hills. When he kissed her, it wasn't urgent. It was steady, like a promise spoken without words. Later, when the lanterns were lit and she sat sewing by the fire, he brought in an armload of split wood and stacked it beside the hearth. He moved slower than before, but he moved like he belonged there. "I can help with the harvest," he said. "If you'll let me." "I will." He sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched. "It'll be hard for them to keep whispering once they see me fixing your roof." She didn't look up from her stitches. "They'll find something else. They always do." He shrugged.
"Latching."
She glanced at him then, needle paused midair. "Why me?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you don't flinch at storms. Because you read more than most men I know. Because you looked at me like I was worth your time when I was just a stranger handing you a basket." She set her sewing down. "You didn't feel like a stranger." "No," he said. "You didn't either." That night, she left her door open behind her as she went to bed. He followed, bringing the warmth of his hand to the curve of her back, the hush of his breath against her neck. They didn't speak. The wind outside creaked the shutters, but inside, there was only the sound of two people finding something they'd stopped believing was meant for them. By morning, he was already outside with a borrowed hammer, measuring her porch for a swing. The barley had been cut and gathered, stacked in neat shocks across the back field, when Francesca found Callen in the north pasture, bent over a rusted hinge from the old chicken gate. His shirt was damp across the back, and the sun had deepened the freckles along his arms. He didn't hear her approach until her boots pressed into the brittle grass behind him. "You're wasting your time on that thing," she said. "It's been broken since before the war ended." He looked up, brushing dirt from his fingers. "Then it's waited long enough to be fixed." She crouched beside him, her knees protesting the way they did when the weather turned. "You always like to mend things nobody else bothers with?" He wiped his hands on his trousers. "I don't like waste. And I don't like seeing something good left to rot." She exhaled slowly, watching his profile as he studied the hinge again. "You didn't come home last night," she said, quiet but firm. He didn't flinch. "I helped drive a stray calf back to the Renshaw pens. It took longer than I figured. Slept in the bunkhouse." "You could have sent word." "I could have," he said, eyes still on the hinge. "But I thought maybe you'd want a night without me underfoot." She stood, brushing straw from her apron. "You don't take up much room." He glanced up then, shielding his eyes from the sun. "You mean that? I wouldn't have asked you to stay if I didn't." He stood with care, favoring his leg less than he had last week. "Didn't figure you, for the worrying kind. I'm not. But I'm not made of stone either." He stepped closer, his voice lower now. "Something happen?" She hesitated. Then, Mrs. Yarrow stopped by. Uninvited. Left a jar of plum preserves and a list of reasons why I should be ashamed of myself. He frowned, lips pressed thin. "What did you say?" "I didn't say anything. I took her jar and shut the door." He was silent. Then he looked beyond her, toward the hills. "I could talk to her." "No," she said quickly. "Don't feed it. It'll burn out faster if we don't give it air." He looked at her a long moment, then nodded. Later, as they sat beneath the cottonwood near the well, Callen held 2 tin cups of water, one of which he handed to her without speaking. She drank, then leaned back against the tree trunk. "I never thought I'd have to explain myself to anyone again," she said. "You don't," he answered. "I know. But the world's not kind to women who stop asking permission." He stirred the dirt near his boot with a dry twig. "It's not kind to men who follow their own map either." "What did you leave behind?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. The wind stirred the grass and brought the scent of turned soil. My brother's ranch, he said finally. Back near Livingston. He runs it like a general's post. Always thought I'd stay and help raise his boys, but he didn't take well to me doing things my own way. What way is that? He looked over at her. Slower. Quieter. Thoughtful. She nodded. That's a good way. He leaned back on his elbows, stretching out his legs. He said I was wasting time with books and worn-out fence posts. Told me to grow up. And here I thought you were too young to be lectured about growing up. I've been old in the head since I was 10, he said with a half-smile. She tilted her chin. Then we're well matched. They sat without speaking, the kind of silence that didn't press or clamor for filling. When the light began to soften, casting long lines across the yard, Callen stood and offered her his hand. I was thinking, he said, about adding a lean-to the smokehouse. You could hang herbs there. Maybe keep the onions from sprouting so fast. She took his hand and rose. You planning on staying through winter, then? If you'll have me. She didn't answer with words, only took the empty cups and walked toward the house, knowing he would follow. Inside, she found her thimble on the windowsill and the mending basket where she'd left it. He took his usual place near the stove and unfolded the plans he'd drawn for the lean-to on a scrap of feed sack. As she stitched a torn hem, she glanced over at him. Callen, if I married you, would you really give up the bunkhouse and the ridge line and all the rest? He didn't look up. I already have. She nodded slowly. Then I suppose I ought to say yes. He set the paper down and came to her, kneeling beside her chair. You sure? I'm tired of explaining myself, she said. But I wouldn't mind explaining you. He kissed the back of her hand, then her wrist, his touch reverent and sure. Outside, the wind shifted. A pair of mourning doves settled on the fence line, quiet and close. And inside, with the fire warming the floorboards and the lamp casting its soft glow, Francesca Holloway stopped bracing against the world and began building something new. With him. The snow came early that year, falling in thick, wet flakes before the end of September. It clung to the fence rails and folded into the creases of Francesca's coat as she stepped off the porch. The sky hung low and pewter-colored, and the breath from the horses ghosted into the cold air as she passed the paddock. Callen was splitting kindling beneath the lean-to, the axe rising and falling in a rhythm that matched the quiet hush of falling snow. A pot of stew hung over the outdoor fire, and the air smelled of rosemary and smoke. Didn't expect this much snow so soon, she called over the wind. He paused, leaning on the axe handle. Neither did I, but I figured you'd rather be warm than surprised. She brushed snow from her sleeves. You think ahead more than most men twice your age. I had to, he said. Growing up, my brother never planned a thing. I got tired of digging us out of trouble. She walked closer, the hem of her skirt damp from the drifting snow. You never talk much about your family. There's not much to say. My father died before I could ride a horse straight. My mother followed 2 winters later. After that, it was just me and my brother on a patch of land too small to grow anything but resentment. She didn't answer right away, just reached for a split log and began stacking it neatly into the crate beside him. He glanced at her hands. You ever think about leaving this place behind? I did once, she said. The year after my sister passed. Thought I'd take the children east, maybe start over. But I couldn't bring myself to leave the land. It holds too much of what I've already lost. Callen nodded, eyes tracing the edge of the pasture where the snow now coated the wire fencing. Your niece still writes?
Now and then.
Her youngest just learned to spell his name. She's proud of that. He wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. You ever think about writing her back with our news? Francesca looked toward the house. The windows glowed soft gold, and the chimney whispered smoke into the sky. I've been waiting for it to feel real, she said. He set the axe aside and stepped closer, his breath curling warm between them. It feels real to me. She reached up and touched his collar, brushing off a flake that hadn't yet melted. You've made this place feel alive again. He took her hand and held it gently between his own. I want it to be more than just a place we live. I want it to be a home. Then we'll make it one. That night, they moved the table closer to the fire. He'd carved a set of hooks for drying herbs, and she hung the last of the summer sage and thyme. The house smelled of stew and pine, and the wind rattled the windows in short, sharp bursts. As they ate, Callen pulled a folded page from his coat and slid it across the table. I found this in the old ledger. It's a map of the back creek. Shows a spring near the ridge. Francesca unfolded it carefully. I haven't seen this in years. I thought come spring, we could clear the path again. Maybe build a second pen out that way. She studied the lines, her finger tracing the old markings. There's wild mint that grows along that stream. My mother used to pick it for tea. He watched her for a moment. We could plant more. You tell me what you want, I'll see it done. She set the map aside and reached across the table, her hand closing around his. What I want is already here. Later, as they stood at the window watching the snow deepen, she leaned into him, her head resting just beneath his shoulder. I used to think the world had already passed me by, she said. That all the good things had come and gone. And now I know they were just waiting. He turned her gently, his hands warm against her waist. We'll make our own seasons here, Francesca. No one else gets to decide what we're allowed. She kissed him then, slow and certain, the firelight casting their shadows long and close across the wooden floor. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and steady. Inside, the house held its warmth. And between them, without fanfare or fear, a life was being built, one fire, one winter, one promise at a time. By late February, the frost had settled deep into the ground. The creek behind the barn held a skin of ice thick enough for Callen to walk across, though Francesca told him not to test it more than once. He hadn't. The wind came down from the mountains like a blade, but inside, the walls held firm. On a morning when the snow softened to powder and the sky shone clear and sharp, Callen returned from the Renshaw place with a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. He stomped his boots free of snow, set the bundle on the table, and unwound his scarf. Francesca glanced up from the ledger she'd been balancing near the stove. More nails? No, he said, peeling off his gloves. Something else. She waited. He opened the cloth carefully, revealing a pair of worn leather gloves and a brass thimble. A small sewing kit lay tucked between them. I found these in the lost box at the outbuilding, he said. Mrs. Renshaw said they'd been there years. No one claimed them. Francesca picked up the thimble. This is mother of pearl inlay. Thought you might use it for the quilt you've been piecing. She ran her thumb along the curve of it. You notice everything, don't you? He shrugged.
Just you.
She folded the gloves and placed them beside the box. You didn't bring anything for yourself. I don't need anything. You're still wearing shirts with missing buttons. He leaned against the wall, watching her. I figured if I left them that way long enough, you might keep sewing them up. I might sew them shut altogether. He grinned. I'd wear them anyway. She turned back to the ledger, but her lips curved slightly. That afternoon, she found him in the root cellar inventorying the last of the preserved beans and squash. He held up a jar in triumph. I think we can stretch this until planting, he said. If we ration the beans, we might not have to trade for more. Francesca took the jar from his hand. We'll plant double rows this spring. We've got the space. I was thinking, he said, brushing dust from his sleeves, about building a second coop. If we raise more hens, you could sell eggs in town again. She set the jar down. I don't need town like I used to. I know, he said. But you like the walk. And the shopkeeper still asks after your pickled beets. She considered him. You remember everything I ever mentioned? I try. She stepped close and rested her hand over his heart. Then remember this. I don't need a bigger coop or more jars or even town. I just want you here at the end of the day. That's it. He brought his hand to hers. You've got me. That night, they sat at the table with a pot of barley porridge between them, the fire low and steady. Francesca reached into the drawer and pulled out a folded letter. It came yesterday, she said. From my niece. He set down his spoon. Good news. She's moving to Boston. Says the city's too loud for her, but her husband's work demands it. He waited. She offered again. Said there's space enough for me if I ever grow tired of the cold and quiet. His eyes searched hers. Do you want to go? She shook her head. I already found what I was looking for. He reached across the table and took her hand. Will you marry me, Francesca? She looked at their joined hands, rough and warm and real. Yes. They were married 2 weeks later, in the small wooden church on the hill. The snow hadn't yet melted, but the sky had softened and the air hinted at thaw. Miriam brought fresh bread, and old Mr. Tiller carried in a jug of cider. Town folks came quietly, respectfully, and no one whispered. Callen wore a clean shirt with every button sewed in place. Francesca wore a green shawl that had belonged to her mother and flowers pinned into her braid early crocus, coaxed from the edge of the thawing creek. They exchanged vows without fanfare. No speeches, no grand declarations. Just his hand cupped around hers, her voice steady and sure. Afterward, they walked back to the house together. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and a hawk passed overhead, silent and bright against the pale sky. Inside, the hearth burned low, and 2 cups sat warm on the table. Callen peeled off his coat and hung hers beside it. He turned to her. It's yours now, you know. This place. This life. She stepped into his arms.
Ours.
In the seasons that followed, they planted new rows. He built a swing beneath the cottonwood and a bench beside the creek. She made preserves from early summer raspberries, and he read aloud to her on quiet evenings, his voice a steady current through the dusks. They never spoke of loneliness again. Children came to the house now and then, nieces, neighbor girls, curious boys from town drawn by the scent of baking or the promise of stories. Francesca taught them how to thread needles and dig carrots. Callen showed them how to mend a fence without wasting a nail. Each night, they returned to the same room, the same bed, the same warmth. No longer waiting for something more. No longer looking back. The world outside kept turning wars and railroads, telegrams and cities, but on that stretch of Montana soil, time moved slower, steadier. As if it, too, had found what it was looking for. And in the stillness between winter and spring, in the hush just before dawn, Francesca sometimes lay with her hand resting on Callen's chest, listening to the rhythm of a life that had finally come home.